I was 13 when my stepmother leaned in close, her perfume sharp and suffocating, and whispered the words that carved themselves into my bones. You were never one of us. I remember freezing, my hand still hovering over the birthday cake she had placed in front of me, the candles burning down faster than my dignity as her smolesso, sweet on the surface, turned to stone the moment my father left the room. And in that moment, I understood that the kindness she showed in his presence was nothing more than a mask. She slipped on and off depending on who was watching, a mask that hid a cruelty she reserved only for me. My father had married her just 2 years before, hoping she would bring warmth back into the house, but all she brought were cold stares, new rules, and a silent war she insisted we pretend didn't exist. I didn't tell him because he looked happy for the first time since my mother died, and I didn't want to be the one to shatter that fragile peace. So I endured the comments, the chores she piled on me, the subtle ways she erased me from family photos and holiday plans, all while she treated her biological son, Ethan, like royalty. On that birthday, after whispering her venom, she pushed the plate of cake toward me with a smile so bright it hurt to look at, and said loudly, "Make a wish, sweetheart," as if she hadn't just stabbed me with her words, and my father clapped, completely unaware that his daughter was drowning in a sea of quiet rejection. Later that night, as I climbed the stairs to my room, I heard them laughing downstairs, sure, laugh high and triumphant, and Ethan bragging about the new phone she had bought him, something she told me we couldn't afford when I asked for new shoes for school. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe she was right, if maybe I truly didn't belong, if maybe I was just an extra piece in a picture-perfect family that didn't have space for me. And I drifted to sleep, not knowing that one day my father's final letter would prove everything she said was a lie, and that the truth would tear her carefully built world apart. The months that followed that birthday felt like walking barefoot over shattered glass, each day cutting a little deeper as my stepmother found new ways to remind me that I was an outsider in my own home. And she did it with such quiet precision that my father never suspected a thing, because she knew exactly when to switch from venom to sweetness, from cruelty to charm. And I learned to read the shift in her eyes the way people read weather when the storm was coming. I could feel it in the air. She started small, like accidentally forgetting to pack my lunch or misplacing my homework, then blaming me when my teachers called home. And she would stand behind my father with a sympathetic smile as she said, "She's struggling, dear. Maybe she needs more discipline." And his disappointed sigh became another weight I carried. Ethan watched all of it with a smirk because he adored the power she gave him. He would barge into my room without knocking, take my things, blame me for messes he made, and she backed him every single time, her hand on his shoulder like he was the golden child sent from heaven, while I was the mistake she was forced to tolerate. The worst part was the way she twisted my father's memories of my mother, slowly replacing them with her own stories, saying things like, she wouldn't want her daughter growing up undisciplined, or she always wanted structure, making my father question his own past until her version became the truth he repeated. One afternoon, as I stood at the sink washing the dishes she had dumped into the basin after hosting a lunch I wasn't allowed to attend, she approached me quietly, her reflection in the window sharp and ghost-like, and said, "You think he'd choose you if he knew the whole truth? You think you matter more than what I've given him?" And though I didn't understand what she meant, the cold certainty in her voice lodged itself inside me. I began to write small notes to myself and hide them under my mattress, reminders that I wasn't crazy, that these things were real, because I feared one day no one would believe me, not even me. I didn't know it then, but someone else was watching her to me father, and what he saw would eventually lead him to write the letter that changed everything. Everything began to shift the winter my father fell ill. Slowly at first, like a shadow creeping across the floor. And suddenly, the woman who spent years tormenting me transformed into the picture of a devoted wife, hovering over him with warm soup, soft hands, and carefully practiced concern. But even then, her eyes flicked toward me with that same warning: stay silent, stay small. My father had always been strong, the kind of man who never missed a day of work, who carried the weight of grief on his back without ever letting it crush him. But now he struggled to climb the stairs, his breathing ragged, his eyes clouded with exhaustion, and she clung to his arm as if she were the only one who cared, as if I didn't sit by his door every night listening to him cough until his lungs burned. One evening, I gathered enough courage to bring him tea, knocking softly and stepping inside, and he smiled tired, but real before she rushed in behind me, snatching the cup from my hands and saying, "She shouldn't be burdened with this, dear. Let her focus on school." But I caught the flicker of annoyance she couldn't hide, because she didn't want him seeing the truth she worked so hard to bury. Around that time, he started asking me quiet questions. "Are you doing okay? Has your stepmother been treating you well?" And each time I hesitated, choosing silence because I feared the consequences. And each time I saw something change in his face, as if he was putting together a puzzle he should have solved years ago. One night, when I passed by his room, I heard him whispering on the phone to someone, his voice weak but firm, saying, "I need to make sure she's protected," and though I didn't know he was talking about me, a strange warmth filled my chest, something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. But my stepmother noticed the shift too, and her hostility sharpened, her patience thinned, and her whispers became more venomous, telling me, "When he's gone, you'll see where you really stand." And the dread that followed me like a shadow grew heavier. I didn't know it then, but my father had already begun writing the letter, one he would hide where only I could find his letter, that held the truth she had spent years burying. The night everything truly shifted was the night my father collapsed in the hallway, his body crumpling to the floor with a sound that sliced through the house like a knife. And I ran to him before my stepmother even processed what had happened, his hand trembling in mine as he whispered my name, not hers, not Ethan's, just mine. And the fear that swallowed me felt like being dragged underwater with no air left to breathe. She finally rushed over, but instead of comforting him, she grabbed my arm and yanked me backward, shouting, "You're making it worse, move." As if my presence alone caused his suffering, and I stumbled against the wall, watching her cradle him in her arms, with tears that looked rehearsed even in panic. At the hospital, she insisted on filling out every form, hovering over every nurse, answering every question before I could speak. And when the doctor asked who I was, she jumped in and said, "Just his daughter." But I handle everything, and the way she emphasized just made my skin crawl. Hours passed, and we sat in a stiff silence in the waiting area until she leaned close to me, her voice low and sharp, and said, "If he doesn't make it, you need to understand, Stepmother, you're not staying in that house. I will not raise a child that isn't mine." I felt the world tilt, but I stayed quiet, too shaken, too tired, too young to fight back. The doctor finally came out with news that he was stable for now, but needed rest. And when we were allowed to see him, he gestured for me to come closer, his hand weak, but searching for mine, and he whispered, "I'm so sorry for everything you've been through," words that made my stepmother's face tighten like she had been slapped. I held his hand until he drifted asleep, and for the first time in years, I felt seen. But she wasn't done, not even close. On the drive home, she turned on the radio, her voice dripping with triumph as she said, "He's confused. People say things when they're sick, Don't think this changes anything. And I stared out the window. Realizing she was terrified, he knew the truth, terrified he might expose her, terrified that the world she built on lies was about to crack. And she was right to be afraid, because the letter he had already written was waiting in a place she would never think to look. The house felt different after that night, as if my father's collapse had shaken something loose in its walls. And suddenly, my stepmother's perfectly controlled facade began to show cracks she couldn't hide no matter how tightly she gripped the pieces. Her smiles too forced, her tone too sharp. Her footsteps pacing the hallway late into the night like she was being chased by her own shadow. She started watching me more closely, asking where I was going, who I was talking to, what I had touched. And whenever I walked past her, she muttered under her breath like she was rehearsing what she'd say if questioned. But the fear in her eyes told me she felt the ground shifting beneath her. One afternoon, while she was out picking up Ethan from a school event, I wandered into my father's study, a place she rarely allowed me to enter, claiming it was too cluttered and not safe. But the truth was, she didn't want anyone touching the papers she monitored so obsessively. The room smelled like old books and cedar, familiar and comforting. And I sat in his chair just to feel close to him, running my fingers along the edge of the desk when something caught my attention, a thin envelope taped beneath the drawer, hidden so intentionally that anyone else would have missed it. My heart pounded as I pulled it free, my name written on the front in my father's shaky handwriting. And for a moment I couldn't breathe, afraid of what it might say, afraid it would confirm every fear I'd ever carried. I slipped it into my pocket just as I heard the front door slam, her voice calling my name with that sing-song sweetness she used when she was suspicious. And I quickly left the study, pretending I had just been grabbing a book. That night, after everyone went to bed, I locked myself in the bathroom, turned on the faucet to drown out any sound, and opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter 4 pages long, written slowly, painfully, and full of truths I never expected. Truths about my mother, about him, about the secrets my stepmother had buried. And as I read the first few lines, my heart flipped. Because the words didn't just defend me, they exposed her entirely. In ways that would change everything. She thought she controlled Dot. My hands shook so hard, I had to grip the edge of the sink, just to keep myself steady as I continued reading. The steam from the bath faucet fogging the mirror, while my father's words unfurled truths I never imagined. Starting with the line that shattered everything I thought I knew. Your mother didn't die the way she told you. I blinked, my mind scrambling, and the letter went on to explain that my stepmother had known my father long before the marriage, that she had inserted herself into his life during a time when he was vulnerable, pretending to be a supportive friend while quietly poisoning his relationship with my mother, whispering lies, planting doubts, pushing them apart until my mother left to stay with her sister for a few months, only for tragedy to strike before she could return. My father blamed himself for listening to the wrong person, especially when he later discovered messages my stepmother had deleted. Messages from my mother asking for peace talks, wanting to fix things, wanting to come home. He wrote about the regret that haunted him every night, the guilt he carried for letting someone manipulative shape his choices, and how he married her later because he felt unworthy of love, convinced that maybe he deserved someone cold, someone who reminded him of his mistakes. But then the letter shifted, softening in tone as he spoke about me, saying he knew she treated me cruelly long before I ever said a word, that he noticed the missing lunches, the changes in my grades, the way I flinched when she raised her voice. And he wrote he should have protected me sooner, that realizing I feared her broke something inside him. He admitted that he started documenting Pink's incidents, receipts, texts, Things she thought she had erased because he planned to leave her once he recovered, to give me a home free of her bitterness, and he warned me that if anything happened to him, the evidence he gathered would be enough to challenge her custody, her control, and maybe even her freedom. The final line read, "You are my daughter in every way that matters. And she knows that's why she fears you." And by the time I reached the signature, tears blurred the ink, but beneath the pain was a spark of fire growing hotter with every word I reread. Because now I had proof she could never silence. I didn't sleep at all that night, sitting on the cold bathroom floor with a letter pressed against my chest like a shield. My father's words echoing through my mind so loudly I could barely hear my own breathing. And by the time dawn crept through the blinds, I knew everything had changed, whether the first was ready or not. When I stepped out of the bathroom, the house was silent, unnervingly so, until I reached the kitchen and found my stepmother already awake, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched, her eyes fixed on me with a stare that felt like she already suspected something. "You were up late," she said, her tone all honey and poison. "Anything you want to tell me?" And I felt the letter burning like fire in my pocket, but I forced myself to stay calm, shrugging as casually as I could before heading to the fridge. She watched every step I took, studying me like she was searching for cracks. And when Ethan stumbled and half asleep, she softened instantly, telling him she'd made his favorite breakfast while sliding a burnt piece of toast across the counter toward me as if that made us a family. But I was too full of anger, too full of truth now, and every time she smiled, I saw the woman who manipulated my father's memories, who erased my mother's voice, who built her life on lies and cruelty. Later that day, while she drove Ethan to soccer practice, I went back to my father's study and searched deeper, checking drawers, shelves, even the underside of furniture, because the letter hinted that he had left more than just words behind it. He had. Behind a loose board in the bookcase, I found a small metal box filled with documents, printed emails my stepmother thought she had deleted, bank statements showing money she had siphoned off, a journal where my father recorded every moment he realized she was harming me, and a USB drive labeled only with my name. I didn't even open it yet. I didn't need to. I knew I was holding everything she feared, everything she prayed would never surface. But as I closed the study door, I heard the front door slam in, her voice calling my name. Sharp and suspicious, and I realized the window for quietly gathering evidence was closing fast. And the battle she thought she had already won was only just beginning. She stormed into the hallway with attention, so thick it felt like the air itself was warning me, her heels striking the wooden floor like a countdown as she called my name again. This time louder, sharper, and when she saw me standing outside the study, her eyes narrowed instantly, suspicion flashing across her face before she forced a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "What were you doing in there?" she asked, stepping closer, her gaze flicking briefly to the doorknob as if checking for fingerprints. And I swallowed hard, praying she couldn't hear the frantic beat of my heart, telling her I had just been cleaning like she always asked. Her smile stretched, too wide, too controlled, and she reached out to brush a strand of hair from my face, her touch icy as she said, "Good girl. But you know you're not supposed to touch your father's things." I nodded quickly and slipped past her, clutching the metal box hidden inside my jacket with every ounce of strength I had, terrified she would hear the faint rattle inside, terrified she would tear it from my hands because deep down she knew I had something she couldn't afford for me to discover. The rest of the day passed like a nightmare, unfolding in slow motion, her eyes tracking me from room to room, Ethan mocking me under his breath like usual. The atmosphere so tense it felt like a storm building right above our heads. That night, when I finally locked my bedroom door, I set the box on the floor and opened it again, spreading everything out in a careful lin of emails, the statements, The journal pages written in my father's slanted handwriting again, I read until my chest ached, until every lie she had crafted unraveled before me like rotten thread. The USB drive sat in the center of it all, small and silent, but when I plugged it into my old laptop, a single video file appeared, dated just a week before his collapse. Clicking play felt like stepping off a cliff, but when the screen lit up with my father sitting at his desk, pale but determined, looking directly into the camera as he said my name, the air left my lungs. He confessed everything: how he had discovered her manipulation, how he feared she was planning something worse, how he was preparing legal documents to protect me and them. With a heaviness in his voice that broke me, he said, "If you're watching this, it means she won." My hands flew to my mouth as the video continued, his final instructions clear, urgent and devastating, and by the time it ended, I knew there was no going back. For a long moment, I just sat there on the edge of my bed, staring at the frozen screen of my father's final message, my breath trapped somewhere between a sob and a scream, because hearing him say those words, "If you're watching this, it means she won," made everything inside me collapse and rebuild at the same time. Like his voice had carved open the truth and handed me the strength to face it. I replayed the video twice more, memorizing every syllable, every warning, every piece of evidence he said he had collected, and every instruction he gave me about the lawyer he trusted, the folder hidden at his office, and the emergency contact at the hospital who knew the real story of his condition. The room felt too small, like the walls were closing in, and I could almost hear my stepmother pacing downstairs, her voice muffled but sharp enough to scrape at my nerves. And I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore, not with everything I now knew. Not when he had fought so hard to leave me the truth. When I finally unplugged the USB, I tucked everything back into the metal box and hid it beneath a loose floorboard under my bed, praying she wouldn't think to search there. And then I lay back and stared at the ceiling, planning each step the way my father had taught me to approach anything frightening in breath at a time. Morning came too quickly, sunlight slipping through the blinds like a reminder that time was running out. And as I walked down the hallway, I stopped when I heard her voice behind the kitchen door, hushed but frantic, saying, "We need to finalize everything before she turns 18, or none of this will work." And my heart thudded violently as another voice of mean I didn't recognize or respond with. "Then keep her quiet." The sound of a chair scraping made me panic, and I rushed back to my room before they could see me, realizing with a sickening jolt that whatever plan she had was bigger than cruelty, bigger than control. She was trying to secure everything my father had left, legally and financially, and I was the only obstacle standing in her way. I clutched the letter in my hands, my father's words becoming armor, becoming courage, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small or helpless. I felt ready, ready to expose her, ready to fight, ready to make sure she never hurt anyone again. The day I decided to confront the truth, head-on, felt like stepping into a storm I had been preparing for my entire life. My father's letter and the evidence from the USB box clutched in my hands like a sword and shield as I walked through the house, each creak of the floorboards echoing like a countdown. And when my stepmother looked up from the table, her eyes narrowed instantly, sensing something in my stance that she hadn't seen in years of quiet, unyielding confidence that made her recoil just slightly, just enough. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice tight, controlling. But there was a flicker of fear behind her practiced calm, and I ignored it, setting the box down on the table with deliberate care, sliding it toward her like I was daring her to touch it. "It's time you stop lying," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, and her smile faltered, fingers tightening against her coffee cup, eyes darting between me and the metal box, and then she tried to laugh it off. A hollow sound saying, What are you talking about? But I didn't flinch. I opened the letter first, letting him speak for me, reading aloud his words. Every accusation, every warning, every proof of her manipulation and cruelty. And as I spoke, I saw her color drain, saw the mask crack, the rehearsed charm falter, and for the first time, she wasn't in control. Then I laid out the documents, the bank statements, the emails, the videos, showing her the evidence she had spent years erasing, every lie she had spun, every betrayal she had orchestrated. And she tried to interrupt, tried to charm and manipulate, but each word I said was a hammer breaking the walls she had built. And I realized I wasn't trembling, I wasn't afraid, because my father had already fought this fight through me. Finally, with her face pale and her voice small, she sat back, unable to speak, and I felt something shift in the house, like the air itself had changed, heavy with truth and finality. I picked up the phone, called the lawyer my father had named, and in that moment, I knew justice was coming, not as revenge, but as the protection my father had promised, the restoration of what I had lost to her lies. And as I stood there, looking at the woman who had tried to make me invisible, I felt a weight lift from my chest, a warmth in my heart, and I whispered softly to her, to myself, to the memory of my father, "You underestimated me." For the first time, the house felt like mine again, and for the first time, I knew that even in the face of betrayal, truth and resilience would always win.